I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. I don't know if this happens to you at all, but I had completely forgotten that I pre-ordered Arrow Video's The Mangler, so when it turned up on my doorstep, that was a nice surprise. It's a weird little Stephen King curiosity that, I'll be honest with you, I'm not even sure if I've seen it before, but seeing that Arrow were going to release it, I thought, oh, okay, come on. It's directed by Tobe Hooper. It's an adaptation of a Stephen King short story. It stars Robert Englund and the excellent Ted Levine, who horror fans will know from Silence of the Lambs and the remake of The Hills Have Eyes. Let's give it a go. And whilst it is not the best movie ever made, it's certainly not the best Stephen King adaptation ever done. It's such a weird, out there, curious little curate's egg of a movie. I'm really glad I decided to pick it up. You can have a lot of fun with it if you don't take it seriously. And watching it the other night, I think I found my personal key to unlocking it, which I'll share with you later on. I think it has a lot more to do with Tobe Hooper's sensibility than Stephen King's. Which is not to say that this isn't a faithful adaptation of King's work. After watching the film, I went and read, probably again for the first time, the short story The Mangler, which appears in Night Shift. And let me tell you, they have sucked the marrow out of that short story. Practically every syllable that appears in the round about 7,500 word short story appears on the screen, plus some additions to pad it out to feature length. There's no getting away from the fact that this weird story about a possessed industrial laundry iron and folder comes from the mind of Stephen King. I have to say, it reads like King in neutral. It's probably the least favourite King story of his that I have ever read. He appears to be absolutely coasting, and I think Tobe Hooper does all he can to inject this project with some pizzazz, and sometimes he's successful and other times he's not. The premise I love. The premise is gonzo. You've got this laundry factory, the Blue Ribbon Laundry, that has this huge industrial machine that presses laundry sheets and then automatically folds them at the other end. And King's short story posits, what if through a series of poorly timed accidents and events, just by absolute random, the conditions for summoning a demon have been met. You know, a little bit of virgin's blood here, some belladonna, some bat's blood, and then all of a sudden, without any intent, a demon has been summoned, and then the demon finds themselves possessing this freaking machine. Insane idea. I love it. King's story, incredibly workmanlike, dare I say actually quite boring. And I was reading this thinking, wondering what Books of Blood era Clive Barker would have made of that concept. He would have just gone with it. Hooper seems to have mined that premise and aligned some of his own sort of kinks and preoccupations and fascinations with it to make a story that is 100% Stephen King's short story and 100% a Tobe Hooper film. The issue a lot of people might have with that is when you say Tobe Hooper film, pretty much everyone understandably thinks Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He changed the direction of American horror cinema. He rewrote the script a lot like George A. Romero did with Night of the Living Dead. And for the entire rest of his career, despite the evidence of his output, a lot of people wanted him to continue doing that. Well, do some more of that. Oh, all right. I've just completely changed the paradigm of American horror cinema. I'll just do that again, shall I? I think what's more telling about Tobe Hooper is that he considered the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre to be a really dark comedy, but no one got that it was a comedy. So when he comes to make Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, he makes it absolutely abundantly clear that he finds this stuff funny, and most of the rest of his output does have this sort of hyper-real, cartoony aspect to it that is in The Mangler. It's in an awful lot of his work. It's in Life Force. The guy likes a laugh. Most of his films are cartoonishly funny, even though the subject matter is dark, and The Mangler is no exception. This is a Tobe Hooper film. Tobe Hooper just happens to have started off his career with a really quite serious documentary feeling, seminal, game-changing horror movie. He's done that. The man doesn't owe you another one of those. You can't just pull another game changer out of your ass. Wes Craven did it 2 or 3 times, but my God, he's the exception. So what we have is where I feel Stephen King approached his idea in a fairly workmanlike way and rattled through it in 7,500 words, and here's a story about a possessed laundry machine. Hooper is able to bend this towards a darkly comic, really satirical look at capitalism in almost exactly the same way he did with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. In fact, these two films could be bookends of one another. Robert Englund plays Gately, the owner of the Blue Ribbon Laundry, who's mentioned once by name in the short story and never appears. So there's this whole space into which this new character, this very extreme, very pantomime character. Let it never be said that if Robert Englund had a choice between ham and cheese, he wouldn't take both. And he absolutely does in this role, with his full prosthetic makeup, his blind eye, his calipers on both legs, and then the widow's peak wig. I mean, he's hamming it up a treat. This is certainly Robert Englund more in his Phantom of the Opera mode and much later Freddy modes like Freddy's Dead than it is sort of his original Nightmare on Elm Street mode. But the way the factory is shot, the way its exteriors look in these sort of strange composite shots, do give it a cartoony feel. They make it look like some sort of industrial Roald Dahl nightmare. And that's when it pinged for me. That, married with actually seeing the conditions that the workers work in the factory, all the steam, the heat, the danger there from the rickety old machinery that can and does kill them occasionally. I realised this is Tobe Hooper's Willy Wonka. This is Tobe Hooper's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Robert Englund as Gately is Tobe Hooper's sort of weird, exaggerated, if you can exaggerate, Willy Wonka. Let's say distorted, darkly distorted version, although Willy Wonka's dark enough himself. Thank you, Gene Wilder, for that wonderful performance. This is Tobe Hooper's version of Willy Wonka, and instead of a chocolate factory, he's just running an industrial laundry, and the workers, who all wear the same uniforms and file in and file out at the end of their shift, are his Oompa Loompas, and rather than sacrificing various children in order to the different machinery and workings of the chocolate factory, his workers are sacrificed regularly to the mechanical monster at the heart of the factory, which is the Mangler. There's a line in the story that the first victim, as she goes through and gets pressed down and then folded at the end, is taken away in a basket, and it's just a line in the short story, and it's there, and it's done. When Tobe Hooper makes a sort of comedic punchline out of that, a full stop, after you've gone through the whole of the first death sequence with the woman getting pulled in, then Ted Levine's cop being called to investigate, and then him seeing the body at the end after the machine has attempted to fold her up like a huge hotel sheet. And when he's outside afterwards talking, and you just see the paramedics carrying her body into the back of the ambulance, and they're carrying her in a little laundry basket like she's some folded bloody laundry. There's there's so little left of her that they could just literally fold her up and plop her in. It's such a darkly comic punchline that is absolutely Tobe Hooper's aesthetic, especially with the barbs it has in there against capitalism and what it does to the working classes, who I feel he has always championed in his films. What's also added to the film that's not in the short story are sort of extraneous characters from the town. It's populated by very weird, not just Robert Englund is way out there, but we have a recurring character called the Picture Man, or I think that's actually, you find out that that's his character's surname, Picture Man or Pictureman, who, well, he takes photos with an old anachronistic bulb flash, perhaps working from the morgue in the hospital, who knows, but he sort of alludes to sort of occult knowledge and a more spiritually attuned awareness of what's going on. He reminds me a lot of Tony Todd's character in the Final Destination movies. Later on, Ted Levine meets the morgue attendant, who's another weird sort of quirky character. You get the feeling that they're trying to maybe tap into small town Twin Peaks vibes by suggesting that there's this wider community of strange and quirky characters that I don't think the film ever fully pulls off, because it is an element of the story that's kind of been bolted on, the relationship between the larger town and this machine and the laundrette, that is there to sort of extend the story out so it can fit a feature length. The film does sag in the middle when we follow Ted Levine and his investigations, and that could have done with a little bit more tightening up. Maybe just another set piece in the middle. I mean, the trouble is when your killer is a machine and it's bolted to the floor in one location, people have to keep going there and putting their fucking arms in it to get into trouble. So you can't just keep doing that over and over again. The exorcism feels a little flat because it comes right after Robert Englund meets his amazingly gruesome death, where we actually see what happens when someone gets folded like a big piece of laundry, and it's glorious. And then the exorcism scene seems a bit necessary and deflated, but then the energy rises in the room again as the fully possessed machine sort of breaks loose from its moorings and goes on a rampage, and it just gets really, really mad at that point. And I wish it had got madder quicker and kept a sort of higher level of energy rather than sagging. It's not the greatest film in the world. Tobe Hooper shoots it in a really interesting way. Tons of really low angle shots where you can see ceilings, so characters are looming over you and the camera roams sort of restlessly around them all the time. It's often extremely, extremely interesting to look at. It's very cartoony and it has these bursts of sort of hyper-violence, and in between that it has moments of sort of extreme grotesquerie from these characters that populate it. What a strange movie it is. I can't say it's good, but it's certainly not bad. What it is it's very, very weird, and off the back of that weirdness, that persuaded me to order another Stephen King adaptation about sort of blue-collar factory workers that I'd not seen before to try and double bill it with, and that's on its way, and I'll review that later on the channel once I've had time to watch it. Graveyard Shift. So let's see how Graveyard Shift stacks up against this, and maybe there's a Stephen King weird-ass blue-collar double bill to be had with the Mangler and Graveyard Shift. Have to keep going there and putting their fucking arms in it.